Chapter 10, January 1918. Dr. Harvey stepped from the sidewalk into the mercantile. Outside, it was so cold his shadow had frozen to the sidewalk. He was wearing a flannel-lined, hip-length jacket, a warm cap with ear flaps, and a worn pair of gloves. He had come to buy a warmer pair of gloves. 2 weeks ago, he had joined the group of townspeople in front of the courthouse at midnight to welcome the new year. The temperature had been near zero, and a strong wind had barreled in from the east. He had asked a man standing next to him if the wind always blew this way. The man had replied, "No, sir, sometimes it blows that way," motioning his thumb in the opposite direction. Dr. Harvey had not been able to feel his hands and vowed to get a new pair of gloves. The store occupied one floor and contained a wide variety of merchandise, including an array of winter clothes items. The goods were displayed on a line of waist-high tables down the middle of the room and in cabinets and shelves along the walls. The shelves covered the walls all the way up the 15-foot ceilings. This made it necessary to use a ladder to reach the highest shelves. Dr. Harvey walked to the back of the room towards the shelves covered with scarves, gloves, and earmuffs. He was glad these shelves could be reached without using a ladder. He slipped his hands into a pair of leather gloves. They were stylish and would keep his hands warm while he drove his Hudson. He also slipped on a pair of woolen mittens. These were less stylish but much warmer than the leather gloves. He selected a gray woolen pair to purchase. He saw the bank cashier looking at boots in a nearby section of the store and greeted, "Hello, good day to be inside." The banker nodded and replied, "I thought last January was cold, but so far January 19 has been one for the record books. It is mighty good to be inside today. I heard someone froze to death in town the other night." "Yes," said Dr. Harvey. "The sheriff found the man's body near the railroad track east of town earlier this week." He opted not to elaborate about the assumption that the man had froze to death. A large gash on the left side of the man's head had been attributed to falling on the edge of a railroad tie. The fall had also been attributed to drunkenness because a near-empty bottle of whiskey had been found near the body. He had thought the death was as likely due to blunt force trauma as to hypothermia, but the non-physician county coroner had concluded a drunken man had frozen to death. Dr. Harvey continued to wonder if this conclusion might have been biased by the identification determined during the cursory death investigation. The determination was based on a union membership card found in the man's coat pocket. The IWW card associated this man with the industrial workers of the world, presumed by loyalty leagues around the state to be seditious. Could this man's trauma have been intentional rather than accidental? Was the whiskey bottle his, or might have been left at the scene by someone else? The cause and matter of death had not seemed entirely established in Dr. Harvey's view. "Well, I hope he wasn't draft age," said the banker. "We need to keep sending men to the military." Dr. Harvey commented, "Since draft age will be expanding to 18 to 45 years, more men will be eligible." This man appeared to be in the expanded age group, but there was no indication he was from Rosebud County. "I understand we had a few volunteers since April and May," said the banker. "Now only drafted boys are joining." Dr. Harvey would be 35 this year and was more cognizant of the draft now than he had been last year when the draft age was 21 to 30. While still in Illinois in 1916, he had considered joining the Army Medical Corps, but when the opportunity to come to Forsyth arose, he decided that maintaining the practice of a physician who had joined the Army Medical Corps would be his way to support the war effort. However, if a draft notice came to him now, he would enlist and presumably be assigned to the Army Medical Corps himself. The banker continued, "Sad news has been coming from the front too. Some Canadian boys were killed in battle at some place called Passchendaele. Many were wounded and are at hospitals in France. We need to show our support for the families with sons in uniform because those boys will be in battle soon. We certainly should not allow German sympathizers to move about in the community spreading doubts." The tenor of his voice was rising and his lips were pursed. Judge Crum should be dismissed from his position. He should be locked up. And some Kaiser-loving German ranchers to be sitting right beside him in the lockup. Dr. Harvey was aware of talk of impeachment against Judge Crum, who lived in Forsyth and served as a district court judge. He had provided advice to a county resident of German background who had been accused of espionage. This led to allegations against Judge Crum. Dr. Harvey thought the judge had as many supporters as accusers among townspeople here. He recalled the conversation he had overheard between the banker and a rancher at the cafe in the spring. The concerns he had heard then about espionage or sabotage seemed less vehement, less hateful than what he was hearing now. He replied, "If I understand correctly, the governor has decided to convene a special session of the legislature next month to consider the concerns you have." "Damn time, too," said the banker. "Those legislators have been sitting on their thumbs long enough. We need to be sure collaborators are dealt with and sympathizers are monitored closely. It's also time to know how many guns are in the hands of the Kaiser's followers right here in Montana." Mercifully, Dr. Harvey felt the banker's wife, who had been on the opposite side of the store, came to her husband's side. She said, "Hello, doctor. It's nice to see you." She locked her arm with her husband's as if ready to stroll and said, "Come, dear, I must get back to the house." The banker looked at her with approval and replied, "Of course, dearest. I have finished looking at clothes today." To Dr. Harvey, he said, "Nice talking to you. Those gloves will be very useful this winter." After the couple departed, Dr. Harvey purchased the woolen gloves, talked with the store's owner, and left. On the sidewalk, he met the county commissioner and Frances Olson, who said, "Good day, Dr. Harvey. The commissioner and I were just talking about the vaccination and quarantine items. The Board of Commissioners will not be acting on these. If you have a few minutes, let me buy coffee for the three of us at the cafe." "A cup of coffee sounds life-saving today," he responded. At the cafe, Alice asked if they wanted a table by the window, but Frances asked, "Could we have the table closest to the stove? That would help thaw us out." "Right this way," said the smiling waitress. "Would you like coffee or maybe tea?" "Just coffee today. Coffee all around," said Frances. When Alice returned with the piping hot coffee, she said to the commissioner, "I hope you will be running for office again this year." "Thank you," replied the commissioner, who would be seeking his third term if he ran again in November. After Alice walked away, he continued, "I was at a meeting in Bozeman recently and talked with one of the Gallatin County commissioners there. They had considered a policy to require smallpox vaccination for school entry and kicked up quite a storm. Some anti-vaccination folks had recruited a candidate to run for his position and damn near sent him packing. They called themselves the Freedom League. The other Gallatin County commissioners didn't want to fight those folks, and I don't think Rosebud County commissioners hankered to tangle with the Freedom League either. That's the tall and short of why I doubt we will be taking any action on a vaccination requirement. We have plenty to do trying to help farmers get grain seed to grow wheat to feed to the troops. I certainly appreciate your efforts. I am beginning to recognize how difficult it can be to establish policies," responded Dr. Harvey. "I continue to recommend a vaccination requirement for school entry, but it looks like quarantine will remain the only arrow in our quiver for smallpox control again this year." Frances opined, "We encourage parents to have their children vaccinated, and most do, but some simply will not consent to it." Dr. Harvey replied, "Since the holidays are over and children have returned to school, we may need to use quarantine measures. I saw a 3-year-old with measles last week. The child is isolated at home, and I instructed the parents to keep other children away from school for 2 weeks until we see if they come down with measles, too. However, with measles in the community, I anticipate more cases. School-age children are likely to be exposed. We need to be prepared for quarantine steps." Several thoughts had gone through his mind as he spoke. He had not been feeling optimistic. Was his medical practice making a difference? Was medical science just too limited to help women to survive pregnancy, newborns to grow to be children, children to become adults, and to adults to live long, healthy lives? Should there be more than fresh air to offer a patient with tuberculosis? Vaccination was a near miraculous way to protect people from disease. But why were there so few vaccines available? Even when an effective vaccine was available to protect people from smallpox, how could he convince some parents and policymakers to at least protect children? If he continued to advocate for building a hospital, would the commissioners take action? Was his practice of patching wounds and mending fractures, prescribing to relieve pain or encourage sleep the best he could do for his patients? Despite these doubts, he looked at the commissioner and said, "For treatment of some illnesses, a hospital with skilled nursing care would be very useful. Might the commissioner support the building of a hospital here?" "Maybe," was the commissioner's brief, noncommittal reply. "I hope you two will use the current quarantine policy to protect the school kids the best you can." Alice returned to offer more coffee, but all three declined. Frances gave her $1 and said thank you. Dr. Harvey walked quickly to his room at the annex. Once there, he sat near the steam heat register and adjusted the supply valve to get more heat. As the room warmed, he recalled what Johanna had told him the day before when she came to his office to share information from her home visits. She had opened the conversation with a reminder. You probably remember the unmarried pregnant 16-year-old we discussed during our drive to the Swenson homestead last June. I was able to get the parents to talk to Dr. Lindbergh. Yes, I do remember. What has happened with that case? The parents were reluctant to take their daughter to Miles City. The young girl and the parents did not feel the pregnancy could be ended. The parents at least said their religious beliefs prohibited that, she replied. However, the parents and the girl agreed with a recommendation from Dr. Lindbergh for the girl to go to Helena to live at the Florence Crittenden home and have the baby there. He had heard about the home in Helena years ago. A New Yorker named Crittenden had lost his daughter Florence to scarlet fever. He was despondent, but had a religious awakening. He was determined to help what he called fallen women and wayward girls. He had found nearly 50 shelters for single mothers, especially unwed expectant mothers, across the country. One of those shelters had operated in Helena for 20 years. Joanna continued, Well, in December she delivered a baby boy. I talked by phone with the matron. Arrangements had been made for the baby to be adopted. The girl saw the newborn only once after birth. She did not return to live with her family. Instead, she is working as a housemaid for a well-to-do family in Helena. The matron told me the girl realized she would not be able to establish her own independence and care for an infant at the same time. The story is not completely resolved, may never be. The girl has not disclosed to me, to Dr. Lindbergh, or to the matron, who the father is. He said, Remarkable. How fortunate for her. You were so helpful. How did you first learn of the pregnancy? The circumstance was curious, Johanna replied. I received a telephone call from the girl's mother. In retrospect, I do not know from where she made the call. There was no telephone at their ranch. She asked if I could visit her daughter, who she said had been acting strange and had been vomiting in the morning for several days, the mother said. I hope she's not pregnant. She said this with a distaste I interpreted at the time to be parental disappointment. Now I wonder if the mother might have known pregnancy was likely and also known the man responsible for it. But she did not disclose any more information than necessary to get help for her daughter. The matron told me the girl showed no interest to contact her parents as the delivery date approached and has had no contact with them now. Remarkable, he repeated. Johanna then changed the topic to share additional information about another issue. I just came from the Mueller's ranch. Gerd communicates more easily now than when I began visiting with her. You remember she spoke little, didn't move her arms or hands when she did speak, and her face was expressionless. She was eating little and had trouble sleeping. She was very lonely. She is still lonely and misses her mother and siblings a great deal, Johanna continued. However, she realizes separation from her family cannot be ended now. She is keeping a diary to give to her mother when the war is over. In the diary, she records her activities and feelings in German. She would talk to her mother about these things now if she could. Instead, her goal is to share these thoughts with her mother when she sees her again. She is very motivated. He observed, She has created her own therapy with your help, of course. Johanna looked more concerned as she continued, but now an issue has become very troubling for her. The Mueller family has become much more isolated as the war has gone on. Neighbors they consider to be friends have not visited for months. People they see during visits to town do not talk with them or exchange even brief greetings, and Herman Mueller is reluctant to take Gerd with him when he comes to town. Gerd has overheard him and his wife talking about hateful comments some townspeople have made about Germans, and in some instances about the Mueller family in particular. Mr. Mueller does not want Gerd to be exposed to this hatefulness. He shook his head and said, This is terrible. I know some townspeople are projecting their fears about the wars onto neighbors who happen to be German, but I like to think hatefulness is uncommon. He had also wondered, although he had not mentioned this to Johanna, if some of the apparent xenophobia, a term he had learned in medical school, might be motivated by something other than war fears. She added, Gerd has become anxious, even fearful about these anti-German feelings. She told me her uncle found a message nailed to a gatepost at the head of his driveway. The message said, Go back to Germany, Kaiser lover. He also found some fence around his land damaged in a way that he thinks was purposeful. He asked, Do you know if he reported this to the sheriff? She replied, I don't know for sure, but I think it's unlikely he would make a report. He said, I will look into this further. I appreciate learning the information you have shared. He intended to talk to Herman Mueller about this. If he could avoid betraying confidentiality, He would also ask Sheriff Starr or a county commissioner about complaints like this. Some situations worthy of law enforcement attention would not be investigated unless complaints were filed. He suspected Herman had reported no more about his harassment than the teenage girl and Helena about her likely molestation. His room was now comfortably warm. That afternoon, when he departed to his office, he did not readjust the steam heat supply valve so he could return to the same comfortable warmth that evening.